Today's episode is part 2 of 2. Yesterday we introduced Ben and had a great conversation, and today we're going to finish off that conversation and jump right into it.
Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
So, switching back to the entertainment industry and some of your experience there, we started to talk about budgets. So let's just dive in. I am guessing there are a lot of people that say, great, Amazon, Apple TV, that's a lot of money and they can do a lot of things. I'm guessing that's not always the case. And when it's not the case, how do you stretch the dollar as much as you can, and how do you get creative? What have you done? What have you seen? What kind of advice can you give to our listeners?
Yeah, it is, like I said, entertainment is associated with big budgets, but it truly is a myth. When we think about major entertainment campaigns, you're thinking like Wicked, Deadpool versus Wolverine, Twisters. Like those are probably less than all of the 1% of the content marketing and campaigns that go on in entertainment. When you think about where you've heard the latest Charlie XCX song, or where a content creator who was talking about, a new book or a new podcast that comes out, a lot of those do it organically, just for the joy of, promoting something they love. Many of them, yes, will require some sort of payment, but it's a lot less than doing kind of a traditional, 4th of July, style campaign, and can be just as effective. So, I hate to kind of say it again, it's about being creative. In my role right now, I lead exclusive series marketing for Wondery, which is Amazon's podcast division. I just launched my 33rd show of the year. And have a very, very low budget. But what I have made a point of is looking across all the various marketing touch points that exist in my company for free. So can I tap into Kindle? Can I tap into Amazon Music? Can I look at the Amazon marketing ecosystem, right? When you go to Amazon.com, you see like one of those banner ads. That to me doesn't cost me anything. I just have to kind of make that connection. But then also working with my partners, right? The people who produce and host, my podcast, and saying, what channels do you have access to that we can tap into to build out a robust campaign with very little to no cost? Like usually my biggest cost is just producing the content itself. And even then I can lean on my partners or the creator community to help me there. So it's really about getting creative and thinking a little bit outside the box about how you can stretch and find opportunities that you didn't even realize were there, like low-hanging fruit in that sense.
I love that. So I love this connection with partnerships. I think a lot of times business and marketers, we think of some of those traditional channels. I've got to focus on the SEO and the pay-per-click and the display advertising and all of that kind of stuff. And you mentioned a lot about partnerships already, but to anyone listening that may not have the greatest partnership marketing efforts in play, how do you convince a partner to actually care about your content? How do you provide value on both ends of the relationship to give and take and potentially have a really thriving environment where partners feel like partners and not just, being exploited by one another?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. My approach is always a what's in it for you, not what's in it for me. Again, we're talking about entertainment, so I work with producers, hosts, writers, journalists, and they obviously want to be part of promoting their content. They want to get it out. So it's always about, it's almost like business empathy. So I'm not saying I want to drive listenership, I want to drive subscriptions for my series. It's about, okay, this is what the goal of my partner is. How am I framing this in a way that shows that everything that I'm asking from them, everything that we're doing is ultimately helping them achieve their goal versus my own? Can't name names, but I work with a very large network. They're an external partner, as we call them, in the podcast space. And they have a massive following. It's about 10 to 15 million followers. And these are like weekly, people who are active and engaged on a weekly basis. Our goal has been to take that captive audience and bring them over to Wondery and turn them into Wondery fans. But we always have to do it with an understanding of what that partner's brand is about, kind of what their guardrails and guidelines are, how they speak to their audiences, and kind of what their goals are. So when we came up with our year-long slate strategy for them, it was always about showing how are we keeping their active engagers actively engaged within the Wondery ecosystem on their content. So it's not about, okay, we're driving you to a completely different show. It's about kind of creating these baby steps for them to say, okay, they've listened to this news show. Now we're going to, we called it create a bridge strategy, where we are promoting other content for them, where they're going to be able to get ad revenue and kind of build exposure for their podcast library. In between new show releases. And again, if we had come from a different angle of like, look, this is what we want to achieve as Amazon Wondery, the behemoth, it wouldn't have gone over. But really kind of turning it on its head and thinking, putting yourself into the shoes of your partner, it's always been a success for me in any job that I've worked in.
I love it. Okay, shifting gears to a little bit more of the storytelling side, because I think that is something that people often associate with the entertainment industry. And I'm guessing a lot of business marketers, myself included, are really jealous of the entertainment industry because of the emotional connection that you can make with your audience, by the nature of what it is that you're selling. And like you said, it's a business like any other. You're still trying to gather people's time, which really any business is looking for the exact same thing. You're trying to get people's time. How do you create an emotional connection? And any advice for anyone looking to create an emotional connection, regardless of how exciting or fun or entertaining their industry, product, and or service may be?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of angles. I think, and I'll use some recent films that just came out, which did it well or did it poorly, because I think that can really help illustrate. I think number one is carving your own story, right? You really want to, and customers want more than just a famous brand or an endorsement or a celebrity to be associated. They want to feel a connection, like you said, to the story and the message and value that you uniquely deliver to them. And I'm purposely not saying that a film uniquely delivers them, because I think it's just as relevant with a product as, we talked about the Starbucks example. I think that the big difference is that we think all the time in terms of storytelling, whereas regular businesses, for lack of a better term, don't. And many even think, well, we are too technical, we're an accounting company, we're whatever it is, so we don't actually have a story to tell. And that's like categorically untrue. A great example, there's a feminine hygiene product called Thinx. And their whole story is you should not be ashamed of your period. And that's like a really powerful emotional story that when you would think of like a hygiene product, you would never make that connection. But that leads to so many different branching out of stories, not only that you can tell as a brand, but that you can also get your customers to tell for you in support of your brand and whatnot. So I think, first of all, it's changing the mindset that my brand doesn't have a story is kind of number one. And as I said, kind of carving out your own story that is unique to you, your brand, your product, that can live in the minds of audiences. The other piece, and it's just as important as, like I said, understanding your audiences on that emotional level. A lot of companies, especially ones I've worked with, only go down the path of understanding from a quantitative perspective. What's driving sales? Is it an offer? Is it, a linear TV ad or whatnot? But they're not necessarily looking at the qualitative. And you need to have the balance between the two to understand what makes the audience tick and what stories they gravitate towards. And that's where, it's not just enough to do a segmentation. You need to dive deeper and get in front of your audience and talk with them. And we do this all the time in entertainment, particularly with film. Living in LA, it's one of the perks is they do a lot of these advanced screenings, and then you go in and you watch, an uncut version of a film, and at the end they have a whole questionnaire or they talk to you. And that's all connecting more qualitative insights on what is emotionally driving. Like quantitative can't really get you there. You need to hear it directly in the language of the audience, because that can also tell you, okay, what tone should my story take? What angle is the best to go down? If I'm doing a true crime podcast, are these people who are just looking for salacious escape, or do they want to try to solve the mystery? But why? Always asking the question why to get down to that single most important piece. And you can't do that by just looking at a data set. You really do need to ask these hard-hitting questions to get to the root. I think going back overall to storytelling, you need to understand the journey that you're trying to take customers on as a brand, and how to tell that journey. And we see it a lot, in some great film examples. Smile, the film came out last year. I worked on that, but also the new one that just came out. The story itself is quite disturbing. It wasn't, truthfully, not one of my favorite films, but the marketing behind it was very clever because it was all about kind of the shock and delight, and showing up in surprising, unexpected places, but also building the mystery around, okay, what is this crazy film about, without giving away too much. And the entire campaign was very slowly rolling it out in places that you would never expect. One of the most successful pieces was at baseball games. I believe they used AI or some marketing technology to have people randomly smiling in the audience, both on TV and on the jumbotrons and whatnot. And that led to curiosity. Is like, people are like, what on earth is going on? Going online, talking about it, and then being able to slowly roll out additional pieces in the story. But to do that, you also have to know which channels you want to populate and what is the role of those channels, which is just as important. So, it's not, unfortunately, there's no single way because it's going to be unique to every brand, but you do need to really know your audience intimately, what is going to compel them, and then how and where to activate to kind of bring them into your story and then help them along, their customer journey.
I love that. So you mentioned the word channels.
Yes.
So when we're looking at it, you just mentioned a great example of a channel that most people, again, they wouldn't have thought of. They, did something in a unique way, and then they let people kind of essentially market, some of this stuff for them and for you. How do you approach channels? How do you recommend that business marketers think about channels, and what can they do to actually find potentially some new channels that could be really beneficial for their business?
There's no science, unfortunately. On one hand, yes, you do need to know this. I find myself saying this so much, and anybody feel free to steal with pride. You need to be where, when, and how customers are searching for and consuming your brand, your content, your product. That's kind of like step number one. But you also need to have your pulse on what is going on culturally, what's going on outside of the confines of your brand or your film or your TV show that you can tap into. Dune 2, which came out earlier this year, did a fantastic job. It is a very stylish film if you've seen it. It has a very particular visually arresting approach. And what that team did really cleverly was to take that and make it a part of the real world. So anytime you saw an actor on the red carpet, award show, interview, each of them was wearing an outfit that represented the themes and the emotional themes, and the concepts of the film. And what was so successful at that is now they're not just talking to like diehard sci-fi fans like myself. They're now talking to fashionistas. They're talking to people who have an interest in that space. Suddenly I'm building buzz in an unexpected sphere and getting people to come see my film, or at least be engaged with elements of my film, because I've tapped into something emotional that you would never really associate with a sci-fi film to begin with. So a lot of that is really like being bold and embracing novelty. And it's not necessarily novelty as in it's new to the world. It's something that may be a little novel to your brand, something that you've never considered before, but it makes sense and it fits, right? And I think a lot of brands will look at film and be like, well, we could never do that. Like, it just doesn't make sense for what I do. But I disagree. I think you can always, I call it steal with pride from any industry if it does make a logical connection to your brand. The last thing you want to do is alienate your customer. But again, going back to Dune, they didn't alienate anybody. They took what is a regular feature of film marketing, which is publicity and events and whatnot, and integrated an element of the film into it that still felt organic. And not only did it not piss anybody off, it actually made fans even more excited for what they were going to get to see on screen.
I love it. All right, Ben. Any final tips or recommendations or even just insights that you feel like could help business, marketing, content creators, and really just learn from your experience? Again, it's such a unique and really cool experience having seen in and outside of the entertainment industry. What else do you feel like people could learn, and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think number one, and something that I've had to learn over the course of my career is that shockingly, audiences change. In fact, much faster now than they do or than they did when I first started marketing. So you can't, if you're doing audience research, if you feel like you have your finger on the pulse, that probably means you're not safe because audiences change and their interests and their likes change, just as much as the wind does. So it's no longer enough to be studying them and understanding them, let's say on a 2 to 3 year basis. You always need to be continually updating what you know about them. And that doesn't mean you always need to be doing research. But for instance, something that my team does is we are always trying to keep ahead of trends and what is going on in the metaverse or whatever we want to call it, the universe around us that we could potentially tap into. But also that can give us a better understanding of where customers' heads are at and what they're gravitating towards. That doesn't mean you change your entire strategy just because, someone now says that it's trendy for all, pop cans to have glitter on the outside. But when you look at a trend or something that's happening and then ask why, that's where you can find the insight. And it could be a hypothesis. You could actually talk to people about it, but using that as a jumping off point to understand where to direct how you create your content, is just something that I always make a habit of doing because not only does it kind of make me a go-to in my company for that kind of information, but it also makes me better at my job and better able to explain to people like partners or marketing directors or whatever why we want to go down a certain path. The other piece or learning that I think brands can take from entertainment is around volume of content and breaking through. In entertainment, there is so much content out right now that, in fact, we're getting content fatigue, to be honest. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be appetite for your audience. And again, when you're thinking about how to break through, it doesn't have to be the most glamorous. It doesn't have to be the most expensive. In fact, as an example, right now in podcasting, podcasting is supposed to be an audio medium, but what we've just learned is that YouTube is now the number one place for people to listen to podcasts. And it's the number one place for people to search for new podcast content. So how has that impacted my business? Well, I've now kind of course corrected some of my strategy to be, all right, how am I posting relevant content? Let's say if we're talking about true crime in the feeds of true crime listeners, but also enticing them to leave their familiar platform of YouTube and come over to my platform, which is the Wondery app, to subscribe and listen to a show. And again, that requires doing things that are a little bit uncomfortable, but again, you need to be where, when, and how audiences are, like I said, searching for and consuming your content. And that can also mean having to change your messaging or having to change your approach. But again, if you have that single-minded benefit, if you understand at its very heart what the audience is, what their need is, in the case of podcasting, I call it their listening need, and that permeates any type of content. You're not going to piss people off. You're not going to scare anybody off. You're actually talking to them on a deeper emotional level, where they are right now, and where it's trendy for them to be listening to, and to convert them over. And I think that's, again, like channels are just so important. One last thing I do want to talk about really quickly, kind of going back to budgets. So, when you see these big flashy campaigns, yes, a lot of money goes into producing those. Like to produce a trailer can be hundreds of thousands of dollars alone, just to give some context. But there are so many partner opportunities, and it's not just partnering with a different brand. Content creators, we live in a creator marketplace right now. Right now, I work with a lot of studios who don't have the resources to produce trailers or video assets. So we, for a very low fee, can work with influencers who create content for us. We are able to kind of give them guidelines, but still it's organically in their voice. But in doing so, they're creating content for us that we can use. And they're also speaking in a voice authentic to their audiences. That's not something my team has ever done before, because it was just unheard of in the subscription podcast business. But we're now trying it because we do have a tiny budget and we need to figure out new ways to get the content that we need created at an affordable cost. So again, you don't have to spend millions of dollars. You just have to be a little bit creative and find other people who can do the work for you. It's the same with partners, right? How do you lead into a partner to create stuff, right? I don't have an email list that I can send out to, but many of my partners do. So we work with them to get emails created that they can send out email blasts and bring people over. So it's just about, again, understanding all the resources at your disposal and then what you can tap into at a low cost.
I love it. Ben, we could go on for a very long time and talk about these things. I think that there's so many lessons, so thank you. Ben, I'm sure there are going to be people that were fascinated, would like to reach out and connect with you online. How and where can they find you?
Best place would be on LinkedIn. I am always happy to connect, chat, grab a coffee, Zoom, whatever you want, and talk about everything around content and entertainment. And I guess you can find my LinkedIn in the episode description.
Yep. We'll post everything in the show notes so it's easy for listeners to find you. Again, Ben, thank you so much for the time and insights today.
No, my pleasure. It's something I love and I'm passionate about, and I hope folks have learned something from me.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.